welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, today's the second Saturday of the month, which means it's time for Moving Medicine Forward with Dr. Michael Klaper and Dr. Zach Burns. And today they're going to be talking about a very timely topic, obesity and weight loss drugs. Please welcome them both back to the show. Hello, Doctor and Doctor.
Hi,
Hi,
AJ,
Chef Asia.
everybody.
Hi. So, we started off with a bang last month. And in case this is someone's first introduction to either or both of you, maybe you could talk a little bit about what moving medicine forward is and why it's so important.
Well, as the director of Moving Medicine Forward, I can say briefly that we are a group of physicians and concerned people, patients, and anyone with a body who wants to be healthier, trying to address the abysmal gap in doctors' knowledge about what their patients are eating and how it affects their lives and their health and their bodies. There's this huge black hole in medical education where we just blow right past the effects of diet when it comes to healing. And Moving Medicine Forward is trying to directly address the effects of nutrition on health and healing and how physicians and all healers deal with the very important issue of the standard American diet and its effects. I've been a physician for the last 5 decades, over 50 years, and Dr. Burns is finishing his residency in family medicine, and both of us are greatly concerned about the health of Americans and everyone who's watching this show. And I'm really valuing the perspective of both AJ, who deals with.
Oh, Dr. Clapper froze. Dr. Burns, are you frozen? Uh-oh.
I'm not frozen.
Okay, Dr. Clapper's frozen, so you're gonna, like, how in improv we have this game where you finish the person's sentence. So until we can unfreeze Dr. Clapper, you can take off with his last sentence.
Well, okay, it looks like he's rejoining. Well, basically, so I've been lucky to be involved in Moving Medicine Forward for several years. And our target is medical and other health professional students so that we can make sure their curriculum, their training includes nutrition. We consider it the only chance we have of tackling chronic disease, because the way things are going, when we emphasize drugs and procedures in medical school and in other training schools, we won't get the job done.
Do you think there'll ever come a time, and I see Dr. Clapper in the waiting room, I just don't know if he can hear us and know that we can't see or hear him, but I know he's here. Dr. Burns, do you ever think there'll be a time where, like, there could be even a law passed in Congress to say it is mandatory for doctors don't have to do this, but to at least know this?
There have been some resolutions, I think, in the legislative space. There's some work being done because people are recognizing that medical students really need to learn about nutrition. It's kind of basic. So we're working on it. It's a multi-pronged project. Hey, he's back.
Yay, Dr. Clapper. Thanks for coming by. While you were logging on again, I asked Dr. Burns if he ever thought there'd come a time where it would be a law, where it would be mandatory for nutrition to be taught in medical school.
Oh, happy day, should that kind of, it really shouldn't be necessary, really. It's such a fundamental part of health and healing and living. We shouldn't have to, it shouldn't require a law be passed that doctors learn about nutrition, but it's probably going to come to that, and I'll begrudgingly welcome it. Anything that gets our colleagues aware that what our patients are eating is why they're sitting in front of us by and large. And it's the most powerful healing tool available to us that we really need to learn how to take advantage of.
There's so much to learn in medical school because my understanding is whatever specialty you become, you still have to learn all the others. How will they fit it in? And do you think that, Dr. Burns, because you recently went to medical school, did you feel that other students would have liked to have learned it, or were you an anomaly?
No, of course. People find it really valuable. They're really excited when we as Moving Medicine Forward approach them and say, would you like to have some more nutrition in the curriculum? Do you want to have Dr. Clapper, Dr. Burns speak? So we can do a journal club and look at the role of diet in either promoting or preventing disease. They love it. And most of the faculty love it and the patients, but it's not part of the system yet. We're working on it.
Yeah.
I think people, once they start their clinicals, third and fourth year, they're going on the wards and they're seeing patients, and a pattern starts to develop. And they say, wait a minute, everyone's got the same conditions. It's heart disease, diabetes, it's complications of obesity, it's premature Alzheimer's, disability, and arthritis, undue autoimmune disease, that was made more likely because of the underlying chronic disease and metabolic syndrome. And so students are, these are smart kids, so they're figuring out, wait a minute, could we do something to prevent this or even reverse it? So they are interested.
I'm curious though. Okay, so doctors learn medicine, but that patients might still get sick, might still be in hospital. Have you ever noticed the kind of food that's served in hospitals? I used to be a respiratory therapist in a hospital, and the cafeteria did have a salad bar, but everything else there was pretty much inedible by somebody that eats like us. And I have actually spoken at hospitals to try to improve food service, at least to get some sodium out, because their low sodium soup was like 1,500 milligrams. And what they tell me in hospitals is they have to give the hyperpalatable food to the patients or they get bad reviews.
So there's this organization, Greener by Default, that is doing amazing work. They're partnering with hospitals. So they were the masterminds behind that big New York City public hospital change.
It looks like, oh boy, have they frozen up? And am
That's
I
so
being
funny.
heard here? I don't
That's
know.
so
Don't
funny
think
because
so.
Dr. Klaper thinks that's funny because we're actually to each other, we're not frozen, and Dr. Klaper is frozen, but at least he can hear us. I wonder if he'll understand to use the chat feature. So let me try chatting with him. But the question was about, the hospitals have actually said that if they don't give the patients the food that they want, they get a bad review. Because I guess, when you're I haven't been in the hospital, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The hospitals do think a lot about patient satisfaction, and that has been an impediment to some of the dietary reform. But there's still a lot of patients who would be totally up for it, especially because these healthier foods in hospitals can be delicious. So I was mentioning Greener by Default, who masterminded that plan in New York City, which has been implemented, where all the inpatients by default get vegan meals, and they have to opt out twice in order to get, and they can, ultimately it's their decision. They could have omnivorous meals, but the default is plant-based, and they're saving money. And of course, getting patients better more readily so they can be discharged from the hospital.
Have you heard of that hospital in Beirut that is a vegan hospital?
No.
Yeah, I had him on the show, George Hayek, and he owns a hospital in, I guess, in Lebanon, and it's a vegan hospital.
Brilliant.
Pretty cool. Dr. Klaper, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm back with you.
Oh,
yeah.
Great. I'm so happy. It's so funny because we could hear you, Dr. Klaper, but maybe we were frozen to you, but Zach and
Yes,
Dr.
you
Burns
were
and I
frozen to me. Yes, right.
were able to hear each other. Well, so we said we were going to talk about obesity today, and I don't know what the current statistics are, but it seems like that's a leading cause of a lot of the problems that you were talking about. But now the treatment, at least for the rich and for people that can get it, are the weight loss drugs, Ozempic, Wegovy. Why do you think it's become such a cultural phenomenon?
Because we're Americans and we like quick, easy, and instant fixes to all our problems. And what could be better than a once-a-week shot unless you eat anything you want and still lose weight? I mean, it's just a merchandiser's dream. It's the overweight person's dream. It's the doctor's dream. It's really easy. Just write their prescription and we'll see you in a month. And so all the way around, it's a drug that panders to just careful with the adjectives here, but with the most convenient desires of our patients. But really, it's trying to cheat Mother Nature and avoid some laws of physics and physiology, and ultimately is detrimental to our health. We'll be talking about that, but these are certainly no shortcuts to a healthy life, for sure. In fact, it may well be just the opposite, actually, inviting diseases of all types in, even though we're losing weight. We'll talk about it.
You think there's going to be some long-term unknown side effects to these drugs for people that are on them? Because my understanding is you don't just take it and lose weight. Once you've lost your weight, you got to still stay on it.
Got to stay on it. If you stop it, the weight comes right back with a vengeance. And so that's just one of the problems. Absolutely. Yeah. And along with paying $1,000 a month or more. And it's tragic for us, who deal with whole food nutrition from the plant-based world, knowing that if people just change their diet, just fill their belly up with soups and salads and curries and chilies and all the wonderful high fiber, high water content plant-based foods, the weight comes off on its own and in a healthy manner. But Americans, many people don't want to change their diet. So what else? Ooh, there's a pill, there's a shot. Ooh, let's do that. And off we go into Ozempic land, and with all its consequences that we'll talk about.
Yeah. What does the medical community think? Like, I mean, I don't think either of you have a traditional practice, but Dr. Burns, you're still doing your residency, so I'm guessing some of your colleagues are seeing this and maybe even prescribing it.
Yeah, I'm still being in residency. I'm still very much within the mainstream. So I've been looking forward to today because I think that people need to hear what's going on in the medical community and what's going on behind the scenes with these weight loss drugs. Dr. Klaper mentions two really key issues. One, and these are issues that for me mean that these weight loss drugs, these GLP-1 agonists, will never be the solution to obesity. Okay, those two things are that when you stop it, your weight comes right back rapidly. No one denies that. The manufacturers, the people, different, stakeholders who are promoting these medications, no one denies that the weight rapidly rebounds immediately on stopping the medication. And the other issue is the cost. So we'll talk about numbers, but the cost is egregious. And so it can't be a viable solution in the end to obesity. We have to do something further upstream. But I want to say a couple things. One is that I consider myself, we as Moving Medicine Forward, myself personally, we are on the team of people suffering from chronic disease. We have deep compassion for them. We're doing all of this for them and for our community so that we can be prepared to tackle chronic disease. We recognize, and Chef AJ, you've been open about your history being obese, and I see people with chronic disease in the clinic every day. They struggle. They struggle with disability, with pain, with isolation, with sexual dysfunction and frustration, loneliness. Mental illness. So it's really a problem, and our goal is to support them and get them feeling better. And we're going to make the argument that the drug companies who are making Ozempic, Wegovy, tirzepatide, they are not necessarily on the patients are of utmost value to them, right? But it's just instrumental value. They don't consider people inherently valuable. It's not in their business model. But it's up to us doctors and our colleagues to remember the inherent worth of these humans sitting in front of us. What's really the treatment for this condition? So we'll get into that.
And it's a reason they're so expensive because the drug companies can do that with a new drug, or is there something inherently expensive about making these drugs?
Oh, I think these drugs could be manufactured for pennies, quote around pennies, but the actual cost of actually producing the drug, I think, is far lower than what they're being sold for. There's just a huge profit margin, much to the delight of the drug companies, but the cost that inflicts on people, on healthcare systems, is just atrocious, and it's non-sustainable. And as Dr. Burns will tell you, it's being cynically marketed to populations that often are the ones who most can't afford it, and that has its own ramifications. There's a lot of cynical marketing behind these high prices as well.
Yeah. You said they were called GLP-1. What is that exactly, and what is the history of these drugs?
So GLP-1, this is a receptor that's in our upper GI system and also in our brain, glucagon-like peptide, all right? So the drug binds to that receptor and triggers a
Oh, now you're freezing up a little bit.
of physiology.
Mhm.
So think of most of they have this antagonistic relationship. One goes up, the other goes down. Let's see. Am I back?
Yeah, just a little bit of a glitch. Yeah, you're good
Okay.
now.
Oh, okay. All right. So think of insulin and glucagon as doing opposite work. Now, when you have a glucagon GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, right? And it's making the body think that there's extra glucagon, so that our endogenous or natural glucagon inside is not doing as much, and therefore the insulin is doing more. So the net effect is promoting the secretion of insulin, and that's one way to get your sugar down. Okay, and then normally extra insulin promotes weight gain. So it's this paradoxical effect that they're still working on elucidating that actually contributes to the weight loss. But we know a couple mechanisms for GLP-1s causing weight loss. One is it works with the GLP-1 receptor in the brain in the hypothalamus to regulate appetite. So it makes your appetite decrease and people eat less. It also inhibits gastric outflow. So you feel full for longer because not as much food is moving as rapidly through the system.
How do they work in the body?
So
Dr.
that's
Burns?
one way, right? So, and those are GLP-1. So when we think of Ozempic and Wegovy, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
And that's a GLP-1 receptor agonist. And then with Mounjaro and Zepbound, that's tirzepatide, okay, which you guys are frozen again. We'll see if everyone can still hear me. So tirzepatide is a GLP-1 and it has an additional mechanism. It's a GIP agonist, gastric inhibitory peptide. And so that has an additional effect. Also, it's been found to have receptors in the central nervous system or the brain. So it's doing work in the gut and the brain to decrease appetite.
Nice. All right.
Well, if I can just add to that, what Dr. Burns says is an accurate description of the mechanism. But in the real world, in the body, we're mimicking we're fooling the brain and the body to thinking that your stomach is really full. You've just eaten a meal, and as a result, many people have a low-grade nausea. This can advance into downright vomiting. Diarrhea is a frequent side effect of this, and people will often just feel generally unwell. I don't feel like eating. I'm about to throw up there, and food becomes really unappetizing from almost from a pathological point of view. This is not, right away, this is not a really natural mechanism. We're taking a big chemical wrench, if you will, and cranking the appetite control mechanism here. But I think it's a pretty crude club to be using. Dr. Burns, you want to continue?
Yeah, I mean, we can let's certainly get into the evidence for it's working, and then also for the side effects. Both are impressive, to be honest. So I have scrutinized the literature on this because I'm very interested in how these trials are conducted and how they work. But I can tell you, so for the Wegovy trials, they're called the STEP series. There's step 1 through 8, and then there's one focused on teenagers. Each trial has a slightly different iteration, but they're basically testing the effect of Wegovy with lifestyle compared to placebo with lifestyle. And on average, people get about 15% weight loss over a little more than a year on Wegovy. And they've done, the first trial is people with obesity. The second one is people with overweight and a comorbidity. The third one emphasizes lifestyle by a hypocaloric diet and then more counseling, etc. So each study is a little bit different. They looked at, one of them looked at people in East Asia, and more recently one on teenagers, so patients 12 to 17, to see whether Wegovy would benefit their, it would cause weight loss. So lots to say about that. I mean, the data is impressive. The problem is, if you're being objective, if you're being scientific about it, we have no reason to believe that these trials have any integrity. So they are funded by the manufacturer. So there's this inherent conflict of interest. Imagine this: you have an energy company, oil or gas or coal, and they want to put in a power plant or do some drilling. And instead of an independent firm doing the environmental survey to see if it was appropriate, it's the energy company, the utility company itself, doing the environmental survey and then saying, yep, it looks good, green light, let's do it. So you can't, that's just, I feel like it's insulting our intelligence as doctors. You're telling us that you ran the study and you have great data to justify use of a medication, but everything from the inception, from the idea for the drug in the study, to how the trial was designed, to how it was conducted and analyzed and summarized and promoted, it was all a very elaborate orchestration of the drug company who stands to profit billions of dollars from this drug being approved. So one more piece about that is that in these STEP trials that I mentioned to look at Wegovy, they do include a lifestyle component. Usually it's a 500 kilocalorie deficit below the person's baseline caloric need, and it's a recommendation for 150 minutes of activity per week. And why do they care about lifestyle? Well, because a long time ago in the 90s, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, which approves drugs, made a sort of guideline. If you're going to run a trial on a weight loss drug, you need some lifestyle in there. Like, do us a favor, just put some lifestyle in there. And so that's likely why lifestyle is integrated into the trial design. But what happens is you read the trial, you read the ancillary documents, everything, and there's no report of lifestyle adherence. So we have no indication of whether any participants did the lower calorie diet or the physical activity. So when the conclusion says the people on the drug did better than the people with lifestyle alone, it's meaningless. I don't know how to interpret that and make a clinical decision. So, I think the trials are quite flawed, but if you take them at face value, you see significant weight loss. Now, even if we granted that significant weight loss occurs, we still have those problems Dr. Klaper mentioned before, that you get rapid regaining of weight on stopping the medication, and that the cost of these drugs is just, it's hard to even wrap our minds around the cost.
Have either of you seen patients on these drugs?
Yes, I have. I had two patients on the drug, and it was working for them, and they were very happy, and they wanted me to prescribe it in higher doses because their weight loss was slowing down a bit. And it was that when I left our telemedicine practice, I handed that patient over to one of the other physicians. But I'm concerned for many reasons, and as you mentioned, could there be unknown side effects? Well, think of what the corner we're painting ourselves into. As Dr. Burns said, when you stop the drug, the weight comes back. So in some ways, we're condemning these people to lifetime medications. Okay, we have no idea what it's like to be on these drugs for 10 years or 20 years. And I'm concerned that, they've been approved for well, children slash teenagers. Well, let me just, mention that when a human baby is forming in the womb and about to be born, if it's a female, all the 500 eggs that she's going to ovulate in her reproductive life, they're already in her ovaries. And those are the genetic blueprints for her child. And well, we'll leave it at that. Well, now she goes on with Wegovy or Manjaro as when she's 14 or 16. She's going to be running Wegovy through those 500 eggs. She hasn't even started ovulating yet, but month after month, year after year, what are these drugs doing to the chromosomes and the genes in her eggs? Well, will there be a higher incidence of childhood leukemia in her children's generation? Who knows? This is a huge black box experiment, and it's frightening. And so we're they're all saying a tiger by the tail. You're afraid to let go because the tiger's going to turn around and eat you. And we got a similar thing with these drugs once you start people on them. So that's just one of my concerns. There are others that Dr. Burns and I will touch upon, but this is powerful stuff, and we are distorting our patients, the society's relationship to food, to healing, to the doctor-patient relationship. These drugs are distorting all of those in that vain hope for the quick fix. Take the pill, you lose weight, eat anything you want. That's
It's not a quick fix if they have to do it forever. I mean,
indeed,
I mean,
indeed.
it's I'm curious if the patients that you've seen on it, had they tried a whole food plant-based diet and it failed them, or did they just want to get straight to the drugs?
Both. They were both. They were on a whole food plant-based diet. They were losing weight slowly, steadily. But with both of them, one their boss, a female boss, was on the drug and just raving about all the weight she's losing. So I want the drug my boss is on. And another one was, yeah, I'm losing a pound or two a week, top, but it's got to be going faster than this. I've got a wedding coming up in June, and I really want to lose this weight. And so those were the pressures these people were feeling to get on the medication.
Wow, I haven't met anybody yet that's on, or at least that admitted to be on it. Can you take these drugs in pregnancy? And are there any other contraindications of people that have maybe certain conditions that shouldn't take these drugs?
You
Well, go
cannot
ahead.
take the drugs.
Yes, go ahead,
And,
Dr.
and
Burns.
they're contraindicated or not recommended in pregnancy. And so Dr. Klaper was talking about, women, because these are being studied and marketed now on reproductive age women. That STEP teen trial, the 12 to 17-year-olds, it's approved for. And the American Pediatrics Association has become more lax in recommending these medications to teenagers. So, of course, that's an issue for sort of habit formation. I mean, the brains are, as much as when I was a teenager, I like to think that I sort of had good judgment. I probably didn't have good judgment. So they're taking a drug and they're not learning how to build healthy lifestyle habits, and they never will, right? And then they might and remember that in terms of the drug stopping, I mean, it's not always up to the patient whether they stop the drug. Sometimes there's an insurance lapse because it's difficult to get these drugs covered. So say, you're on your parents' plan and mom gets laid off, okay, or dad changes employers, or it's just, and then, or if you're an adult and I mean, there's so many different factors. Say you're working, but then you go on Medicare so far doesn't cover these medications for the indication of weight loss. Then you have a lapse. Where are you now? You're back at square one because you hadn't developed healthy habits. You didn't have the medical community working with you on those healthy habits. So no, contraindicated in pregnancy. And then there are a few other issues because people often have gastric distress on these meds, right? Imagine I've had patients, I have dozens of patients on these drugs. Okay. I don't have as much control in residency. So some patients I inherit from other providers and they're already on them. Sometimes, yesterday I had someone come to me asking to go on one. And I think it's okay in some circles. So I'm not suggesting a blanket boycott of all of these weight loss drugs. In select cases, I think it can be the lesser evil compared to the risk associated with unchecked chronic disease, whether it's obesity or diabetes, in some cases. But I think we as doctors can do better in really laying out the risk profile and not just saying, yeah, go for it. Yeah, it's pretty safe. Go ahead. So a couple side effects. One, you feel nasty and there's nausea and there can be vomiting. There can be diarrhea. And so when you have what we call a volume contraction, there's not as much fluid pumping through our veins. If not enough fluid gets to the kidneys, you can have a kidney injury. It's basically poor blood flow to the kidneys. If that gets out of control, it can be permanent renal injury. You have the risk of pancreatitis because these drugs work on peptides and hormones in the pancreas. They change the architecture. The small ducts can get clogged. You build up inflammation. You can get pancreatitis, which is a serious condition. What else? Well, there's a black box warning on these drugs about the risk.
Explain what a black box warning is. I did not know they had a black box warning. That's very interesting.
It's kind of like on the cigarette carton, it says, the Surgeon General, so they're required to report this because it's a serious consequence or potential consequence of the product. And they're sort of the company maybe would prefer not to be this explicit about it, but they're required to say that. And in this case, with semaglutide, there's a black box warning about medullary thyroid cancer. Now, we don't know how big that risk is. It was mostly seen in the in the clinical research on, or rather, the molecular research on these rodents developing thyroid cancer. But we just don't have long-term data yet. The longest one of these drugs has been around 10 years. Been out around 10 years. So what else, Dr. K? Am I missing any side effects? I mean, it works on the whole system. Remember that, here's another one. Because of these receptors are also found in the central nervous system, including the brain. Right now, there's an FDA investigation into the risk of increased suicidality on GLP-1 agonists. So we don't know yet, but there's a proper investigation being done. Are these drugs, because of the influence on sort of appetite regulation and reward pathways, are they making people want to take their lives? So, it's kind of a big deal if you're thinking about starting someone on this drug.
Wow. Just want to take a moment to thank Natalie for her super chat donation. She writes, thanks, AJ. These doctors and your advice have changed my life. I'm officially in remission from rheumatoid arthritis. As Dr. Klaper says, it's the food. So thank you. Dr. Klaper, I don't want to miss this question in the chat that just came in for you, but you both can answer it from Colleen. I believe, Dr. Klaper, you watched Dr. McDougall's show Monday and this question came up, and it is, do you have a word for obese that is not fat shaming? Because now apparently, like, I got in trouble once because I used the word obese because that's what I was told that you're supposed to use. You're not supposed to say somebody is fat. And I was told by this doctor, well, you're fat shaming them. So what do you say? Is there a word that we are allowed to say now that won't offend people?
Someone says you add suffering to the world more when you take offense as when you give offense, because no matter what term comes up, people are very sensitive about the amount of adipose tissue they are carrying. And as physicians, we focus on the health effects. The fact is that when people have excessive amounts of adipose tissue, they are more prone to diabetes, to infections, to high blood pressure, and the abdominal fat puts out inflammatory cytokines. So obesity is usually a state of inflammation. And for us to be told, well, you can't mention any of this, you can't talk about this because people are sensitive about it. So
Oh, great. Right in the middle, he froze. Are you unfrozen,
Yeah,
Dr. Burns?
I'm unfrozen.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so were you taught anything about sensitivity, or because you're a recent medical school graduate,
Yeah.
about what is the correct term for someone with it's just such a long thing, someone with extra adipose tissue.
yes, that's as close as I can come, and it leaves me shaking my head.
Oh, there's an acronym, EAT, extra adipose tissue. Yeah.
Aha, okay, fair enough.
Oh my
All right,
goodness.
Yeah.
excessive adipose,
You
yes.
know, it'd be interesting because if I don't anticipate that many people are going to their doctors and saying, "Give me these drugs and I'll eat a whole food plant-based diet while I'm on them." It seems like for many people, it just allows them to continue a bad diet. And even if they're now at an ideal body weight, can't the diet they're eating still cause all kinds of problems in their body, even if they're not overweight?
Oh, AJ, that's one of
Yeah.
my major concerns. Absolutely. Because again, there's like a get out of jail free card. Oh, I can eat anything I want. And they proceed to then go in excessive amounts of meat and dairy and oils, etc. And packing your intestines full of animal flesh 2, 3 times a day is a recipe for colon cancer and for leaky gut leading to autoimmune diseases, to artery disease leading to heart attacks and strokes and dementia. The Western diet carries all these diseases, and these drugs facilitate, amplify the amount of these pathogenic foods that people are eating. So I have a huge concern about that. But before this all rolls down the drain, is there any possible use for these drugs? Well, as I've inferred earlier there, and as well, all three of us are aware, well, the real best treatment, healthiest for treatment for obesity, of course, is a diet of whole plant foods because the calorie density is so low. These soups and salads and steamed veggies, they're mostly fiber and water. They don't stick to you. They don't add to weight on the body there. And plus they bring in all these lovely phytonutrients that make you healthier. That we all know the litany there. So the only use I can see for these drugs is, okay, you want to go on for 3 months, 6 months while you are learning to eat a whole food plant-based diet. Okay, that would be the only possible use there. But the agreement, the contract has to be that we're coming off these drugs in X number of months, and your health coach and your plant-based dietitian who you're seeing going to help you stay on a plant-based diet. That's how these drugs could be used, but they're really unnecessary. Truth of it is, people eat a whole food plant-based diet. The body takes care of all this on its own, and you're not hungry.
Do you think people's resistance to doing it the way you recommend, the way I did it, but it took me 27 months to lose weight, it wasn't overnight, is that it takes too long, or that if they're on a whole food plant-based diet, they have to avoid foods that they've come to know and love, familiar foods, pleasure trap foods, cheese, things like that?
I think there's fear, right, in giving up foods. Right before I went vegan, I was afraid, is my life going to be a little worse, or a lot worse because of foods that I'm giving up? I grew up eating everything. So there's some fear and there's sort of cultural tradition. But I think the real issue is education. So we can be educated in our school systems, in medical settings, about what actual food does, the power of food to revert, because a lot of people are making decisions to pursue a riskier medication or a bariatric surgery, because they haven't had that education about what food and other lifestyle factors can actually do. So we need to work that into the system so that people can have a truly informed decision, right? Before any procedure. So if I'm doing a procedure in the office, or doing a biopsy, or putting in an IUD. They've written a written consent, and you have to provide, you have to explain the risks and benefits and alternatives. If we were that thorough about treatment for obesity, I think a lot of people would make different decisions. We're not always so thorough. There are a lot of factors.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to discuss to get to the cost issue, which affects patients too. So, right, it's not just the system, but it's patients, because they struggle to get these things covered by insurance, and then, as I mentioned, insurance can lapse. But right now, Wegovy and Ozempic are around $1,200 a month, so about $15,000 a year. All right. Zepbound and Manjaro are around, like, it's $1,060 something. So let's say $12,000 a year. That's actually a lot of money. So right now, our national health expenditure per year is about $4.5 trillion. If the people who are eligible for weight loss drugs, and remember that 42.5% of Americans at this very moment have obesity by their BMI. And you don't even have to have obesity.
Say that number again. Did you say 42.5?
Right. 42.5% of the American population has obesity.
That's almost half. Yeah.
Right. And the projection for the year 2030 is for it to reach half. Every other one of us will have obesity. This is a huge public health crisis. Like, this is it. And so I feel lucky to get to work on this issue because it is so pressing. If everyone who's eligible for one of these drugs took them, I did the numbers earlier, our national healthcare expenditure would increase by 44%. So we're already spending more than any peer nation, any nation in the world in healthcare for questionable outcomes. It's over $13,000 a year per person. Okay, if we went ahead and increased health expenditures by 44% just because of a medication, the whole thing would collapse. Like, it's not even it's like a non-starter. So to say that, for the drug companies or medical societies to say that we really need everyone eligible for these drugs to be on them, I think is very myopic.
Dr. Burns, have you, in your hospital work or outpatient clinic, have you seen drug advertising go by directed at communities of color for these drugs? Have you noticed any racial inferences involved in the marketing?
Yes. So there's some shady stuff going on. Basically, remember that the drug companies, the patients have instrumental value. So let's get people on medication. We can get doctors prescribing it. Our profit margins increase. Our shareholders are happy. That's the business model. It would be weird if they didn't take every step to achieve that end. Okay. And that means you have some really bizarre situations where Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly, who make these drugs, are generously donating to civil rights groups. So the NAACP, other groups that represent Black and Hispanic and Asian communities, they're donating to these groups. And then the civil rights groups are advocating for legislation that would advance, that would sort of ease the prescription and coverage for these drugs. So as soon as a drug is covered by insurance, then the drug company is happy because they're going to get paid. They don't care whether they're paid by the patient out of pocket or the insurance company. If they're getting paid, that's a great thing. And because most people could never afford the list price for these medications, insurance coverage is a big deal for these companies. So what they're doing right now is pushing legislation in collaboration with the civil rights groups to get Medicare to cover these drugs. So far, Medicare, you're not allowed to cover weight loss drugs. It's just not something Medicare does. They're trying to change that, and they're leveraging civil rights advocacy groups. And you think about the drug company, like, do they actually care about these marginalized communities? One dime. I mean, it's the most disingenuous effort that I've ever seen. It actually makes me sad. I mean, it's so nasty, these kind of tactics, and yet this is just sort of business as usual for them. They get creative. They have the pharma is the biggest lobby in Washington, D.C. out of any other industry, and they're talented. Got to hand it to them.
You know, isn't Ozempic a drug that sometimes people with diabetes also get? And if so, how is it? Are there appropriate uses for it?
So yes, so Ozempic is indicated for diabetes itself. You don't need obesity, and they have demonstrated that you can reduce your A1C or average blood sugar by taking Ozempic. Similar issues come up with the integrity of these trials because they were 100% funded by the manufacturer. Clinically, I've seen some A1Cs go down a little bit, maybe half a point or a point. We're talking about percentage points. Is it the solution to diabetes? No, it can't be. It's the same issue when you go off of it, and it's not addressing the underlying cause. Remember that with diabetes, we have our insulin receptors are you can think of them as clogged. So that insulin knocks on the door of the cell. Hey, let me in. I want to bring some sugar out of the bloodstream into the cell to be utilized. And no one's letting the insulin in. The door's locked. Basically because of a high-fat, hyper-processed diet that's clogging and causing dysregulation in those insulin receptors. So Ozempic doesn't solve that problem. It is what we call a Band-Aid solution.
Would you recommend the GLP-1s over gastric bypass if somebody came to you and said, look, forget this. I'm not going to do the whole food plant-based diet. Which do you think is the lesser of the evils?
Oh, I would prefer the person go on the Ozempic because it's reversible. They may have a balloon in their weight, etc. once they stop it, but at least their anatomy is still intact. When people have surgery to rearrange their digestive plumbing on any level, but certainly gastric bypass seems to be one of the most disruptive. The GI physiology is never the same, and often the person is left with chronic problems, needing everything from digestive enzymes to chronic diarrhea. So rather than and that is irreversible, and because the anatomy has been altered. So between the two, I'd rather they go on the Ozempic. I can help them with a plant-based diet to do a healthy weight loss. But the cow's out of the barn once they have the surgery done.
Yeah. How do these drugs even get approved? You mentioned that there are these trials, but aren't the trials sponsored by the drug companies to begin with?
They are. So there's that conflict of interest. And then once the trial's done, it goes to the FDA for approval. And unfortunately, the threshold for approval is pretty low. The pharmaceutical industry might take issue with that and say, you know how much we invest in these trials and this research? It's not easy to get a drug approved, but as a provider, these medications that don't work so well are getting approved all the time. And they just need to demonstrate that they work, to a certain extent, and that they're safe enough. And I think that those thresholds should actually be higher. If we're considering the best interests of patients who will be on the drugs. But in terms of that, what were we just talking about? So bariatric surgery. I agree. I mean, bariatric surgery is so invasive. Let's do anything before that. And I wouldn't, recommend boycotting. Like, so a bariatric surgery, maybe very last resort in a very specific case, it could be appropriate. It's just that we're doing too much of it because we're not thinking about upstream prevention and treatment. And we're actually making bariatric surgery more likely because hospitals, knowing that surgery is really lucrative, they're investing in weight loss centers and bariatrics departments, snazzy new operating rooms specifically for bariatrics. This is happening all over the country, and so it's not really a coincidence that bariatric surgery is happening. It's like the obesity and diabetes industries, the hospitals are investing in bariatric surgery. And one thing about GLP-1 agonists is that because they slow down gastric emptying, they have a risk of gastroparesis, where the stomach just doesn't, it stops, it gets paralyzed. Like parar in Spanish, gastro. So the food is not exiting the stomach, and that's part of why it works, because you feel full. But if you have too much paralysis and moving the bolus of food through the system, you can end up with a really problematic gastroparesis. And there are more and more cases of irreversible gastroparesis. So the drug does it to you, and then you go off the drug for several months, and you're stuck with that gastroparesis, which you never had before. And some people might not know, but diabetes itself is a risk factor for gastroparesis. So we're recommending a drug that increases that risk to a population who's already at risk. Some of the people with irreversible gastroparesis need bariatric surgery anyway. They need someone to go in and reconfigure their upper GI system. So it's like, it's all part of the same issue.
And building on what Dr. Burns just said, I've been a doc for 50 years now, and I watched the 1970s and 80s and 90s roll by, and every decade we get the phenomenon of the big oops. The drug companies will announce a drug that everybody says, oh, it's wonderful, it stops pain, it stops inflammation, whatever. And after 5 years, 10 years, oops, we didn't realize that this drug also XYZ and causes increased risk of stroke, a heart attack, whatever. We've seen so many drugs pulled off, Pondemon and Fenformin and Darvocet and drugs that I would be prescribing all the time. Oops, we didn't realize. Well, it's just a matter of time before these GLP-1 drugs have a big oops attached to them. Dr. Burns just described, oops, we didn't realize that it can cause a long-term gastroparesis. And on top of that, can we do anything about that? Yes, there's a drug for that. There's a drug called metoclopramide, Reglan, that will force the stomach to empty. And so you give the Reglan to counteract the gastroparesis that the Ozempic caused. But the problem with that is that the Reglan can affect the motor function, motor cells in the brain, and the person winds up with this dreadful state of tardive dyskinesia where they lose their fine muscle coordination. This whole cascade of side effects builds up from the oops, we didn't realize that. And I think it's just a matter of time before the big oops list on these drugs starts getting longer and longer. Now, again, it's the food.
And then they'll develop more drugs to treat the side effects of the drugs.
Side effects of the tardive dyskinesia, which they already have. They're advertised on 6 o'clock TV commercials about these drugs to overcome tardive dyskinesia.
It's interesting because I don't watch regular television, but I do have some shows on streaming, but there's still commercials almost all the commercials are for drugs and for conditions I've never even heard of. But then at the end, when they have this little thing, I mean, it's just crazy. All the side effects, anal leakage. And it's like, I mean, why are they even advertising drugs to people, number one? And, you mentioned Darvocet. Boy, I haven't heard that since I was 11. I used to take that drug for menstrual cramps. I loved it. And when it went off the market, it was terrible. It's like, what am I going to take now?
Indeed. Again, the old tiger by the tail, and it's sad and really unnecessary. So much of this could just be changed with healthy nutritional patterns. Absolutely.
Well, okay, playing
So,
devil's, first of all, I'm sure you know that I'm not a fan. I mean, I think people have the right to do whatever they want. I personally am not a fan. I took fen and it was great while I was on it. But then once the FDA took it off, all my weight came back. But could someone argue that the risk of having excess body fat and maybe a diabetes is worse than doing nothing? So if the patient isn't willing to change their diet, they should be taking these drugs and instead of doing nothing.
so I think the drugs are here. They're not going away. They deserve to know about them. But they need a really balanced explanation of their options, right, in the exam room. So if a patient told me, like this happened yesterday, a patient said he's over 400 pounds, he's struggling emotionally, he has hypoventilation, the weight on his chest is so severe, he's struggling to breathe at night. I mean, he's really struggling. And he said, after a really balanced discussion, he wanted to start a GLP-1 agonist. And we can't even if I want it, I couldn't do that overnight because it's going to be a whole process with his insurance, and we'll see if it works. But I'm open to prescribing that for him because I think that's his right. But for the system to aggressively promote these drugs and to infiltrate medical societies and med school curricula so that we systematically make these drugs a huge deal and basically the first line. We pay lip service. We say, well, first line should be lifestyle, and then that's it. And then we spend 100 times more curricular hours discussing the pharmacology. So ultimately, a patient, I think, should be able to go on one of these, but so many fewer would if we were really doing real medicine and education.
Yeah, I've got some questions from some of the live viewers on Instagram, and one of them is, why does weight come back? Is it because the hunger comes back when you come off the drug, or does just stopping the drug automatically cause weight gain?
So yeah, the hunger comes right back, and right, that's the main mechanism in sort of the experiential level. Why am I losing weight? It's because you're not nearly as hungry as before. Your appetite has been totally changed, and as soon as you stop the drug, you revert to your regular appetite. So yeah, I can't think of any case in which someone's been able to keep the weight off. But back to the point, I mean, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a course in med school on, the drugs that were taken off the market because of different issues? I think we need to know that history, but just society today in general is so fast paced, in medicine in particular, that it feels like all we have time to do is figure out the present and the future. But I mean, we need some perspective from the past. Just look at the opioid settlements. So drug companies are paying out billions of dollars because they were found to have known the addictive quality of these opioids, just taken so many people's lives. It's ruined so many people's lives. They're my patients. It's horrible what the loosening prescription of opioids did to our culture. And so if there was any doubt about the fallibility of the pharmaceutical industry and their deception, just look at the opioid crisis.
Yeah. So coming back to your thought about the hunger comes back, there's another question on Instagram, which is, can you comment on the mechanism and action of fiber that acts very similar to these drugs by reducing food noise and turning down the appestat?
Well, when you eat a high fiber diet, and we're just, again, talking about soups and salads and steamed veggies, whole plant foods, the small intestine, the upper part of the GI tract, breaks down the food, and does the absorption of the nutrients. By the time the food mass gets down to the colon, down to the bottom there, it's mostly fiber. But that's exactly what the doctor ordered for all the wonderful microbes we have living in our colon, and they love the resistant starches and the various types of fibers that come down. It nourishes those microbes, and in turn, those microbes, as they digest the fiber for their own needs, they create molecules like butyrate that nourish the colon wall, but also other molecules, these small ones, uh, from the fiber get absorbed into the bloodstream. And as they flow back up through the brain, they have a mild effect similar to the GLP-1 drugs. They will suppress the hunger center in the brain. So it's a three-way bank shot, the fiber down to the colon, to the bacteria, and then up back through the bloodstream to the brain. But the effect is the same after eating a diet or a meal of wonderful curries and chilies and with lots of beans and legumes in it. For the next hour, you're really not hungry, and part of that is not only the mechanical filling of the intestines, which also releases your own GLP-1, but also the fiber byproducts are also in the brain, and they also suppress hunger. Mother Nature knows what she's doing. The body knows what it's doing. You eat healthy foods, and you won't be hungry until your next honestly deserved meal comes along.
Wow.
So
How do we get
95,
Mhm.
sorry, so 95% of Americans do not get the basic daily allowance of fiber. So imagine if we tackled appetite issues from that standpoint, right? If we just made an effort to get people enough fiber through whole foods. Remember that by definition, plant foods are high in fiber. We could probably do a lot to regulate appetite that way, because I mean, and you look at the number, it's only 5% of us get enough fiber, so that's pretty concerning.
I'm surprised the pharmaceutical industry doesn't develop a prescription fiber pill.
Well, they have Metamucil sells hundreds of millions of dollars.
But
Oh,
that's not
fiber.
$1,000 a month. They're not making enough money on that one.
That's the thing.
Really.
It's the patents have run out, right? It's just fiber, and so it's not lucrative for them. They don't. That's not. They're not. You don't see fiber ads. Actually, I did recently see a Metamucil ad, so there must be something in it for them. But of course, you know, it's actual fiber that's encapsulated in real food. That's part of a whole food diet that's going to do the best work.
One of the viewers is saying, well, I tried a plant-based diet for 4 days, but I'm diabetic and my sugars went up.
There is an art. If you truly have diabetes, now it depends if you have type 1 or type 2 diabetes. If it's type 2 diabetes, by far the most common, the usual cause is that the insulin receptors are clogged up with fat, but they're still there, they're still working, and as one goes on a low-fat, whole food plant-based diet, as the weeks go by, the insulin receptors unclog, and insulin starts working better, and the blood sugars come down. And as our friends over at the program Mastering Diabetes, that I really recommend to all the viewers here, will tell you there's an art to food selection in those early days to minimize the rise in blood sugar. And you really wanted the low-fat foods. It's another program in itself, but do not let those a few days of high blood sugars throw you off a truly healthy nutrition program like a whole food plant-based diet is. But there is fine tuning, and there are certain food patterns that are helpful, but it's certainly not a reason to, I can't do this, my blood sugar goes up. Yeah, it's going to go up, it'll come down. And again, learn about it, become a student of diabetes through the Mastering Diabetes program, but don't let elevation blood sugar throw you off the true trail towards health there.
Yeah. I'm curious, question for both of you, because this comes up a lot, because some of the doctors on the show are advocates of this as disease, if you will. Others don't believe it's real. Food addiction, is this something you think is real? Is it something taught in medical school? Because I know, Dr. Klaper, you say it's the food, but what is it that makes people become 400 pounds? What makes it not be able to stop eating the food because it hasn't been around for most of human history, and now it seems to be the problem.
Hmm. Well, I think a part of it is the term itself. Addiction is such a loaded word here. And when I went to med school, the definition I learned of addiction is the regular ingestion of a substance that, when it is no longer ingested, causes physical withdrawal symptoms. And if a person is addicted to heroin, they stop taking the heroin, they have physical withdrawal symptoms of the nausea, headache, etc. Even caffeine, with caffeine headaches, can be the withdrawal syndrome can be qualified as an addiction. So when it's applied to eating, do people, if they don't get a cheeseburger, are they going to go into actual withdrawal? No, it's not that kind of, I don't think the term addiction is truly medically applicable to what we're talking about. That said, as people talk about that food noise, if they're constantly thinking, replaying that sensation as you bite into the burger, the salty, sweet, chewy, meaty sensation. People really crave that, and the food companies know that very well, and they certainly produce products that pander to that. Um, and it becomes the focus of one's life there, and that combination of fat and sugar is just particularly obesogenic, if you will. You burn the sugar and you store the fat, and that's what most of these foods are. And so and we're in a society where we augment that. I had a patient who had real problems with controlling their eating choices, and they said something very enlightening to me. They said, "Doc, if you were a true drug addict, and you are taking all these drugs, and you're driving down the street, and the signs on the stores were there's a heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, what temptation that would be, of course, for someone who's truly addicted to drugs. Well, someone who can't control their eating choices, what do you see when you drive down the street? Burgers, fries, pizza, chicken. It's that kind of society we're in. I have such compassion for these people, because those are just seeing those words completes that circuit in their brain. They can taste it. They want that sensation again. And so in this pathogenic food environment that we've created here, the poor person struggling with their weight, ricochets from one temptation to the next, and there's no real help for them. And I don't blame them for wanting the pill or the shot if it helps them get out of that swamp. And one of the best things they say is that the food noise retreats, recedes, and that alone, I think, is its most powerful effect. And as Dr. McDougall would say, of course, they don't feel like eating. They're borderline nauseated all the time. It makes them feel sick. But for whatever reason, I wouldn't call it a true addiction, but it's a cynical manipulation of classical conditioning and visceral conditioning we have to make people constantly want that sensation of just having taken that piece of pizza or that burger or that hot dog or that chicken wing, and we constantly fan those flames. And society doesn't really have to do that, but they're making lots of money doing it, and so it continues. And so my heart goes out to people trapped in that web of temptation and seduction. And so I can understand why people are attracted to these medications.
Absolutely. Hey, Dr. Burns, since you went to medical school more recently than Dr. Klaper, what did they teach you in medical school about the true cause of obesity and metabolic syndrome? What did they say the cause was?
I don't know if it really came up.
It never came up.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I don't remember that lesson, and I would have paid attention. It's sort of it's taught the way it's taught. It's sort of, okay, we have this epidemiological situation where there's a high and increasing prevalence of obesity, diabetes, heart disease. They describe the pathophysiology, but more on the molecular level. We don't really, so never did they say we have, increased energy consumption and sedentary lifestyle resulting in this sort of net positive energy with the positive adipose and sort of I mean, it didn't really come up. And so that's why we had to make our extracurricular group, Plant-Based Healthcare, to make sure our classmates got that info. We invited Dr. Klaper to speak. So students are hungry for it. They're doing it on their own. But yeah, it'd be nice if it was a standard feature of the curriculum.
That's so
Just on the addiction piece, yeah, you know, whether or not it's a proper addiction, there's some overlap, right? As soon as these hyper palatable foods that are engineered that way, as you said, as soon as they start to rewire your neurocircuitry, right, your brain chemistry, and the reward system and the dopamine, then you may not have acute withdrawal, but you're gonna have cravings when you stop. You're gonna have, right? So that's why cravings are such a powerful way that these behaviors are perpetuated, because people like if you've been on sugar or fat or fast food or you will continue. The brain. So there's this low level of dopamine, and you get a trigger. This overlaps with addiction to drugs. You get this a low level dopamine secretion, and it's saying, "Ooh, I just thought of that trigger. I really would like to consume that thing," and it bothers you, and there's this drive for you to pursue that consumption until the moment it lands in your mouth, and then you get a big dopamine spike, okay, and then it sort of goes down again, and you're back in that state where after a couple of hours after the fast food meal, you're gonna crave it again. It was never a truly satisfying fix. It was just you got your fix temporarily, and you're gonna need one predictably a few hours later. So
Yeah, it's something. You know, I don't know what to say because it's such a difficult subject to broach with people, I'm sure, you know. They're very
it
sensitive
is.
about their way. I mean, but yet, I mean, I'm sure they're aware of it because that's why they want to take these drugs. And I understand it too. When my doctor offered me fen-phen, I was like, sign me up. It was great because in addition to, I mean, I could eat anything I wanted because I wasn't hungry, and the weight literally fell off in just a couple of months. And I was basically the weight I was now, but instead of taking 27 months like it did with whole food plant-based eating, it took about 3. But man, then the letter came in the mailbox from the FDA, and the supply was cut off, and I was ordered to get an echocardiogram because many people had heart lung defects, and it came back as quickly as it came off, probably more quickly, but then even more weight came off because I learned absolutely nothing. I just didn't get so hungry. I could eat 1 cupcake instead of 6, drink 1 Dr. Pepper instead of 6. So I don't know. I'd love to hear from people that are on it and their experience if it's the be all and end all, you know?
Were you scared when you got that letter? Like, go get an
Oh
echo.
yeah, because I mean I was in my 30s, and I mean I'd never seen a cardiologist, and I've never seen one since, and I had known this guy, since I was little, and it was like, yeah, it was pretty scary because like I don't want a hole in my heart or my lung, but at the same time I was like, oh, you know, so I mean, I
Mhm.
get it. So I'm not judging people that take it. I really understand it because it's, we're always looking for shortcuts, conservation of energy, it's easier, but, I think about you can do it right or you can do it over. So it'll be interesting, if this show is still on the air 5 or 10 years, having you back, and not to say, see, I told you so, because I am genuinely worried about what long-term side effects can be for people. Also, what I'm hearing is you mentioned how expensive they are. So it takes many, many years for a drug to be less expensive, right? Something like 17 years or so. But my understanding is that if a person gets to a normal BMI, the drug company, the insurance company that may be paid for it won't pay for it anymore because now they're normal weight, but then they still need the drug. So now they're going to have to pay for it themselves.
And I'm sure that the drug company is already working on a solution for that, to keep this thing covered, knowing that the weight comes back. Yeah, for a patent, it may be 7 years until it goes to the generic price, but and then 11 years, I believe, for biologics. But what they do, what we've seen with Humira, right, the one for rheumatoid arthritis, what they do is they create a new it's a new version of the same drug, but it has one little molecular tweak, and all of a sudden, if you start over, the clock resets. You get another 7 or 11 years on the clock of that exclusivity in the market and super expensive. So to date, Humira is the most, it has grossed the most sales of any drug because they were doing that kind of those tactics.
Mm.
And also they have to play for the fact that if you graph the weight loss progression, weight comes down dramatically on these drugs for about the first year and a half. After about 17, 18 months, the weight loss plateaus. You stop losing the weight. You're wherever you've lost about 20% of your initial body weight. You've lost your 40 pounds or 50 pounds, and then the weight loss stops, and you're just stuck on that plateau. Well, are the drug companies going to keep paying for it at that point? We'll find out. And people should be aware that this is not a magic ticket to that slim figure that you've been looking for. The weight loss eventually stops after about a year and a half.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. One of the live viewers on Instagram says, every time I go vegan, by midnight, I'm eating chicken or meat. I have strong cravings. Is it related to my type 2 diabetes?
So there you go. People do experience cravings. I think it's hard to know with this individual what kind of, right? Because we know some people who go plant-based, it's not necessarily a balanced diet, and you can have a super unhealthy plant-based diet. When you have support, when you have the education, when you have a medical professional involved, and you pursue a whole plant food diet, you will do great. We see it predictably. We see people enjoy it and do well. But if it's, some of these plant-based diets, if it's like you're just trying it out, you may need some more balanced nutrients. For instance, some people don't get enough calories. They're not used to the volume that sometimes you'd have to eat on a plant-based diet because the calorie density is really low and the nutrient density is high. Sometimes you have to eat a bit more. So that's one thing, that can help people thwart the cravings. Another one is to make sure they're getting fiber from unprocessed foods, again, for appetite control, drinking plenty of fluids, exercising, sleeping. Sleeping is so key for appetite regulation. In hospitals, we wake people up so much. It's a big problem. People can't ever get enough sleep, and it's hard to get better that way. So without knowing this person's specific situation, it's about, getting the resources to do it right. But I totally believe in you.
One of the live go ahead, Dr. Klaper. Sorry.
And here's one place, and again, I know it's a semi-controversial subject here, but that I felt so bad for that person. That by midnight I'm eating chicken again. Here's one place where those the plant-based faux meats, they're the chicken nuggets and the veggie burgers that are made of plant foods. But if you're really, but they're pretty close in taste and texture. And if she's just looking for that taste and texture hit there, I'd rather she chomp into a plant-based chicken cutlet than a real one. And because that will slowly start changing her desires for taste and textures, etc. And to transition food. And this is one place where it might really serve her well. You don't stay on it forever, but here's one place where I think those foods may have a role.
Wow. So Heather, who's watching live, says she's on it, but she's only losing about a half a pound a week, and it's given her a GERD, an acid reflux.
Again, you're dealing with human beings, and you give to 1,000 people, you're going to get a whole range of responses. And the bell-shaped curve, many people will do just fine on them, but at the tails of that bell-shaped curve, some folks are going to not lose the weight. Other ones will lose the weight, but have hellacious side effects along with it. Again, we are not mechanical devices. We are biological creatures, and you're going to see variation in the responses that we have to be prepared for.
Yeah, and it's a good point that there are going to be people watching this video who are on these drugs, who struggle in so many ways with their chronic diseases. We are on your team. You may be on the medication. We're not saying immediately stop it, right? Talk to your doctor, but you want to right now start incorporating healthy lifestyle habits, namely whole plant food eating style, among other healthy lifestyle behaviors, so that you can ultimately come off this thing and be a well integrated, well adjusted, a healthy, the best version of you. So that is what we wish for you.
Can anyone see either of you as a doctor?
Me, not at this time. I'm just reorienting my practice. Hopefully, in the next few months, I'll be able to accept new patients. Dr. Burns, you're going to be relocating to Rochester, New York, in a family practice up there.
I will. Yeah. So right now I'm in residency, and so it kind of goes through the residency clinic, and I can't do consults or anything. But yeah, and then I'll be in Rochester, New York, and it's yet to be seen. But what I will be doing then, starting this summer, is I'm going to work alongside Dr. Klaper with Moving Medicine Forward, and so you'll see us around. But in terms of one-on-one clinical, maybe not yet. What I can offer is my humble website, herbivores.life, where you can read my stuff. I have a writing section and a blog on some of these issues, and the writing gets a little bit more big picture and creative, so you might enjoy it.
Wow. You're not going to be working with like Ted Barnett by any chance in Rochester, or Tom Campbell, are you?
Yeah, it's a good crew up there. I won't work with them directly. I mean, we're going to collaborate. I hope they'll have me on the Rochester Lifestyle Medicine Institute. They do some great case reports and everything.
Is that where you live by any chance?
I will. I'm moving to Rochester. Yeah, this
Because
summer.
I'm going there in July. You want to say hey?
Of course.
Have you ever heard of Kuka College?
Oh,
I
I'm
think
speaking there.
you're
Yeah, I'm
speaking there,
speaking
Dr.
there.
Klaper.
Yeah, I'm going to be that you and I are going to duh. And Brad is watching the provost. Dr. Klaper and I are going to be doing a conference there together with Dr. Gregor and Dr. Ted Barnett and Dr. Carrie Graff. Maybe you could come.
Well, I'll be around. I look forward to seeing you all there.
That would be great. Good. Thank you so much. This has just been, yeah, I mean, you gentlemen picked the topic, but really, really engaging conversation. And I know you helped a lot of people.
Great to be here with you, Chef AJ, and I love this snazzy hat, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, this was your idea, because I'm sure Dr. Klaper knows he's always welcome on my show anytime, but it was your idea to bring him on with you. So thank you, Dr. Burns. See, young doctors, so smart, aren't they?
Yes, gives me hope.
We got to get you out there, Dr. Klaper. Not that you're not already out there. Any word on the book, Dr. Klaper?
It's slowly coming along. I've got the first draft in my inbox here that I got to go over and proofread, but we're inching to it. Hopefully by the autumn, by the fall, we'll have it.
Right. Well, we will promote the heck out of it and to help you make everyone know. Well, thank you, Dr. Burns, Dr. Klaper, and thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time for Nutrition Insights with Dr. Peter Rogers. He's going to be talking about the skinny on fats, and he thinks differently than a lot of the other guests. So be sure to tune in. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for